From the start, pornography named a battlefield, a place where no assertion could be made without at once summoning up its own denial, where no one could distinguish value from danger because they were the same. Walter Kendrick, The Secret Museum, Pornography in Modern Culture. The Porn Era, 1972 to 1995. The adage is that if you want to know where technology is going, follow the porn. Note that the saying doesn't say porn sets the pace gracefully. The early pornographic games are just bad movies grafted onto, at the time, an ugly-looking medium with black characters and audio bleeps. The interesting part isn't that these games were made. Pornographers are nothing if not capitalists. But that people actually bought these sophomoric diversions. 80,000 people paid $50 for the first Atari 2600 porno game. Think about that for a second. People initially supported pornographic games not for their hallowed gameplay, nor to get off on a Crayola-level representation of a woman, but because the purchase and ownership itself was a deviant act. The pure absurdity of having porn on what was then considered a kid's medium could make even the worst game attractive to the consumer. Video games themselves remained a novelty well into the 90s. Throw sex in there, and you're getting some attention. From 1972, with the launch of Deep Throat and Pong, to 1995, right before the first digital sex symbol was created, we see pornography setting the pace on how sexuality should be expressed and interpreted in video games. There is no Lara Croft, there is no Grand Theft Auto, and there is no great video game canon to lean on. Only a joystick, Pac-Man, and years of bad pornographic movies. No wonder so many of the early games were atrocious. Spaceships. It is summer 1972, and Linda Lovelace is giving fantastic blowjobs all across America. By relaxing her throat muscles, Lovelace puts the length of her lover's penis in her mouth and beyond, taking it all the way down to her esophagus without choking. The movie Deep Throat caught her sword-swallowing act on film, inspiring jokes on Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show and helping drive pornography to the profitable stratosphere. Filmed for $40,000, Deep Throat went on to make hundreds of millions in box office receipts, home videos, sexual aids, and other merchandise. Deep Throat played more than 70 theaters coast to coast, a wide release for porn. Its distributors hired couriers who would put the film in 35mm film reels in the trunk of their cars, drive to the porn theaters, and hand-deliver the movie. The couriers would pick up the reels when the theaters finished showcasing the film, more hastily if they received a tip that an FBI raid was planned. A century earlier, United States Postal Inspector Anthony Comstock raided bookstores carrying material he deemed obscene. In 1873, Comstock laws made it illegal to mail any product deemed, quote, obscene, lewd, and/or lascivious. For Comstock, these range from contraceptive devices and medical textbooks to the work of Voltaire and Walt Whitman. Huge public bonfires were lit to destroy the obscene material. The same Comstock laws were in effect during the summer of 1972, hence Deep Throat being distributed hand-to-hand, not by mail. But lawmakers at the time were beginning to question what was legally obscene. Hollywood itself had just replaced the restrictive Hays Code of 1930, initially started by another former United States Postal Inspector, Will H. Hays, with the Motion Picture Association of America rating system that would eventually rank movies as G, PG, PG-13, R, and NC-17. Filmmakers now had Tinseltown's blessings to explore more adult topics, which made it easier to produce films like the gigolo-centric Midnight Cowboy and the transgender fantasy Maya Breckinridge. What was legal to publicly show, however, was a totally different discussion. The Supreme Court, led by Justice Earl Warren, struggled to replace Comstock's broad, vague concept of obscenity with a perspective appropriate to post-war America. Though rarely achieving unanimity, the Warren Court progressively contracted the domain of obscenity, in large part by affirming the appropriateness of sex as a matter of public consumption. It observed that sex and obscenity are not synonymous, says the book Intimate Matters, A History of Sexuality in America. The Supreme Court's viewpoint did not dissuade states from holding their own obscenity trials. And in 1972, deep throat cases began in several courts nationwide, including in New York. It has become a symbolic target for Mayor John Lindsay's attempt to rid the Times Square area of commercialized sex, the New York Times wrote about Deep Throat. The mayor and the legitimate theater owners and other businessmen may like to wipe out the porn industry, but it nevertheless seems to be meeting a substantial public demand. Many thousands of New Yorkers were going to Times Square's New Mature World Theater each week to catch Deep Throat. The audiences included celebrities, diplomats, critics, businessmen, women alone, and dating couples, few of whom, it might be presumed, would previously have gone to see a film of sexual intercourse, fellatio, and cunnilingus. Newspapers printed photos of celebrity Deep Throat fans, including Jack Nicholson and Truman Capote. When asked his opinion of the movie, Capote said, "I thought the girl was charming." Beneath Manhattan, telecommunications specialist Charles Dolan had spent years installing miles-long stretches of cable. The spider web of wires connected to all the major New York City hotels. Dolan's company, Teleguide Inc., fed information to the hotels that would help them with customer service and checkout. Teleguide Incorporated expanded into Sterling Manhattan Cable, the first urban cable network in America, and caught the attention of Time Life Inc., which decided to buy a stake in the company. Dolan then pitched a new idea to Time Life Cable, a national cable channel using satellite beams, not cable wires. In 1972, Time Life launched Homebox's Office Network, or HBO, the first premium programming channel. Not under the same FCC regulations or commercial constraints as ABC, CBS, or NBC. Homebox Office could broadcast unedited, uninterrupted sports events, theatrical movies, and original programming directly into subscribers' homes. Midnight Blue, a weekly cable program, showed porn clips and interviews with adult movie stars. One of the first episodes featured the cast of Deep Throat. On the opposite coast, California engineers Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney were also convinced entertainment technology was going to be the next big thing. They pitched in $500, $250 apiece, and began Atari, the first major American video game company. A disputed history has Atari calling its concepts for military engineer Ralph Baer, a man who is often called the godfather of video games. Atari was actually named after a move made in the Japanese strategy game Go. Bushnell had tried doing an arcade game before, 1971's Computer Space, released through coin-operated manufacturer Nunning Associates, but it was too complex for the average bar patron accustomed to pinball. He guessed that people would need something simpler. Shortly after starting Atari, Bushnell hired Al Acorn, a former associate of Dabney's, to create a table tennis video game. Two players would use their paddles to smack a brick-shaped ball back and forth. The instructions were only one sentence: avoid missing ball for high score. They would call the black and white game Pong. In summer of 1972, Alcorn set up a Pong prototype in Andy Capp's Tavern, a hole-in-the-wall bar in Sunnyvale, California. 2 weeks later, he got a call from the manager. The game had stopped working. Alcorn got over it as soon as he could and opened up the coin box to give himself a free game. As he unlocked the machine, a cascade of quarters spilled from the box. The Pong arcade game stopped working because too many quarters jammed the system. In its first year, there were more orders for Pong than any other pinball machine at the time. While other coin-operated machines brought in about $50 a week, Pong often brought in $200. Atari was still collecting quarters from its arcade route, which had grown considerably. Bushnell, a sailing aficionado, was able to buy a yacht and multiple homes. Another entrepreneur, Reuben Sturman, distributed wooden boxes all across America and Canada. Sturman's enclosed unit, just wide and tall enough for someone to sit comfortably, had a wooden seat, a film projector, and a door. The user would deposit a token, close the door, and press a button to pick one of several movie choices. An 8mm pornographic movie would play for about a minute, maybe less. You would then have to purchase more tokens from the host up front to continue watching. Before inventing the personal peep booth, Sturman already owned, according to Hustler publisher Larry Flint, 1,200 adult bookstores across America. With the peep booths, that's when my thing took off, Sturman said in an interview. Money was coming in so fast I didn't know what to do with it. Guys come in with bags of $50,000, $100,000. Sturman would funnel money through business fronts, coerce porn shops into purchasing his products, and live in several different residencies to hide his whereabouts. If he went out, he would often wear an elaborate disguise. The most public of rare Sturman photos has him wearing a large fedora hat, a business suit one size too large, and black-rimmed glasses connected to a bulbous plastic nose and a wide, bushy mustache. It wasn't clear if the mustache was fake, too. Sturman had many enemies, but his most feared may have been the FBI. The agency spent more than 2 decades trying to smoke the incognito porn magnate out of his hole. Sturman probably took comfort when the FBI lost its obscenity-obsessed leader, J. Edgar Hoover. The 77-year-old FBI director died of a heart attack on May 2, 1972, 3 weeks before the Deep Throat premiere. When considering the first fruits of motion picture technology, it is natural to think about black and white slapstick comedies or the epic masterpieces like D.W. Griffin's racially charged Birth of a Nation. Short, erotic movies, called stag films, often as brief as a mere minute, were also an important part of this initial group. It could show a couple making out, a woman fondling her breast, or a shy young lady showing a little leg. Stag films allowed America, for the first time, to easily observe itself. During the Second World War, the military used a machine called the radio teletype, or RTTY, to transmit text messages. Creative men and women could use these letters and symbols, comparable to those on a modern-day keyboard, to make exceptional replicas of pinups. By the 60s, computers still weren't cheap enough for the average household, but became available at major American college campuses. Dedicated nerds would spend hours in the computer lab turning their favorite Playboy centerfolds into text form, saving the images onto punch tape reels, and printing them off to hang on the wall. In one of these labs, MIT engineering student Steve Russell created Space War, considered the first video game ever. The 2-player spaceship battle inspired Nolan Bushnell to create games. Before starting Atari, Bushnell was hired by Ampex Corporation, a California engineering company often credited with inventing the modern videotape. The University of Utah grad had worked as a midway barker, convincing passerby to throw baseballs at stacked milk bottles. Bushnell's job at Ampex was to work on a digital recording system, but, typical of his restless personality, he got bored within a few months. He kept thinking about Space War, the game he spent hours playing in the computer lab at his alma mater, and he knew he could make money off of it if he brought it to the masses. Ampex understood that engineers were happiest when doing their own experiments, so it allowed Bushnell to take spare parts home and tinker on what will become Space War, the coin-operated version of computer space. Bushnell turned his 2-year-old daughter's bedroom into his workshop, and he left Ampex in 1972 to start Atari. Atari entered the home market with 1974's Home Pong. Pong's enduring popularity, along with a favorable distribution partnership with Sears Roebuck, made Home Pong a holiday bestseller. By 1976, the toy manufacturer Connecticut Leather Company, or Coleco, released a multi-game system with a Pong clone that cost half as much as Home Pong. Fairchild Camera and Instrument created the Channel F, the first video game system to have interchangeable cartridges. Atari was already working on a top-secret cartridge-based system codenamed Stella, after a, quote, hot-looking employee. But it needed more capital to get the system out, and in 1976, a weak economy made going public not a viable option. In desperation, Bushnell sold Atari to Warner Brothers for $28 million. He would stay on as chairman, but quickly became tired of the new corporate structure and left. He then founded Chuck E. Cheese Pizza Arcades, a venture that would be worth billions. Warner Communications invested an estimated $1 million into the once small company, and Atari finally released the Atari 2600 VCS, Video Cartridge System, in October 1977. The 2600 had more features than the Channel F, such as selectable game difficulty and a new game controller, a chunky brick with a button and a long pole in the middle, called a joystick. Still a considerable force in the arcade industry, Atari could do home translations of its hottest coin-op titles like Breakout and sell them on the 2600 system at a premium. Atari had another bestseller on its hands. As Atari blossomed, Sony, Kodak, and several other companies joined Ampex in the race to create a reliable home video system. By the mid-70s, the competition narrowed to Sony and JVC/Panasonic and its two video cassette recorders, Betamax and VHS. Compared to VHS, Betamax had faster playback and easier queuing to find specific parts of the movie. Betamax didn't have any pornographic films, which Sony decided not to support. Home movies took off, but the inferior VHS format, not Betamax, will become the standard. As Eric Schlosser notes in his book Reefer Madness, when videocassette players became widely available to American consumers, adult film companies offered their titles on video, while the major Hollywood studios resisted the new medium. As a result, by 1979, 75% of all videotapes sold in the United States were hardcore films. In the early 80s, John Holmes was well known inside as well as outside of the porn industry. Lanky and awkward, Holmes had a 13-inch penis as wide as the average male wrist. Up until Deep Throat, Holmes and others were usually seen in short movies called loops, modern X-rated versions of stag films. The 62-minute Deep Throat, as well as Debbie Does Dallas and Beyond the Green Door, extended the length of the average porn, allowing audiences to get to know the people on the movie screen and later the television. The popularity of the VCR made Holmes, as well as Linda Lovelace, Vanessa Del Rio, and Marilyn Chambers, pornographic film superstars. Porn companies could now sell home versions of their most popular movies. Holmes did dozens of loops for Caballero Control Corporation, a movie company that released the highly popular Swedish erotica series and would bring most of its theater productions to home videos by the 80s. Caballero and other companies with a strong movie catalog could make millions translating them cheaply for home consumption. Between 1980 and 1983, Caballero released more than 50 Swedish erotica home movies alone. The Atari 2600 was also awash in entertainment options. The vintage Atari 2600 still led the pack, holding the market from new and technically superior systems in television and ColecoVision. It had the biggest user base. It had the most games. Unlike the home video market, all the video games were made by the same folks that made the hardware. Only Atari created 2600 games, which would be the equivalent of Sony being the only company making PlayStation 3 games. Sony publishes only about 20% of the PlayStation 3 game library. This absolute control allowed Atari to make money on both the system and the games, selling, as the old saying goes, both the razor and the blades. It also didn't give designers credit. The cartridge would just read Atari. In 1984, game creators, wanting more credit and more creative control, left Atari and created Activision, the first third-party video game company. Its first major hit was David Crane's Pitfall. Atari immediately sued, but could not stop Activision from making $65 million its first year, developing for both the Atari 2600 and in television. Atari and Activision settled out of court and agreed that Activision could continue to make games, but only if Atari received a royalty for each 2600 title sold. This established the modern-day royalty system. People watch this case very closely because a lot of money could be made by marketing games for different systems, especially the 2600. Leonard Herman says in Phoenix, The Fall and Rise of Home Video Games. Following the lead of Activision, many other companies jumped on the bandwagon. By the summer of 1982, dozens of companies announced that they were releasing 2600 compatible games. That year, Caballero Control Corporation linked with American Multiple Industries, a manufacturer of video and audio cassette storage cases, and created the Atari 2600 game company Mystique. It was named after one of Caballero's movies. Both video games and porn producers began to realize that home audiences, not the arcade or theater audiences, were now the ones to target. Creating an arcade game could be a heavily orchestrated event, with art designers, programmers, and manual laborers to put together the 8-foot-tall, 200-pound machine, while a home video game cartridge was usually done by one guy who did all the programming, graphics, and level design. A straight-to-video movie had a fraction of the production costs a traditional film carried, not to mention fewer distribution problems and less film crew. A hit porn could be made by two guys, a woman, and a camcorder. It was no longer about translating products to the home, but making products specifically for the home. The turning point came in 1982 when it finally went all video. Pornographer Ed DeRue said in Jennifer Osborne and Legs McNeil's The Other Hollywood, "I miss film tremendously. Film had soul. Video had nothing. Video is just a way of making money." Caballero's Swedish erotica compilation could go for $79.95, while Mystique's first title, Custer's Revenge, retailed for $49.95. Released in 1982, Custer's Revenge is named after the famous general who took his last stand at Little Bighorn. After winning a battle in 1869, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer allegedly invited his officers to avail themselves of the services of a captured squaw, while he selected a Cheyenne woman named Monaceta for himself, according to the book Intimate Matters. The image of a good Indian, a beautiful, pure princess who saved white men, as did Pocahontas, gave way in the 19th century to the image of the savage and promiscuous squaw. Cowboy lore in particular elaborated on the theme of the Indian whore, who, quote, lays on her back in a cowboy shack and lets cowboys poke in her crack. In Custer's Revenge, you move the pixelated cowboy from one end of the screen to the other, avoiding deadly arrows falling from the sky, to reach a submissive Native American woman tied to a cactus. If he makes it to the woman, he grabs her and has sex until, after 20 or so strokes, the next level begins and he starts over. Custer's body is pink and nude, defined by wiry appendages, a round belly, and a penis as long as his arm. His only attire is brown cowboy boots, which are more wide than tall, a sky blue 10-gallon hat, and a thin mauve bandana wrapped around his neck. The bandana flips between two opposite frames of animation, flapping flatly in the quote-unquote wind. The captive Native American woman has brown skin, thin long legs, and a body like a reverse eighth note. The maiden's enormous chest points out towards Custer like an arrow over her flat stomach, and her ass protrudes nearly as much in the opposite direction. Her arms are akimbo, and her mouth and eyes are wide open, as if anticipating rapture. She only wears a black headband with a dull brown feather sticking out. With an overdeveloped top, skinny legs, and a wire-like feather attending from her head, she wouldn't be out of place in the movie Ants. The background is decorated with brown mountains that recall meatloaf, and immobile white clouds above a mauve teepee, the same colors as Custer's scarf, shooting chunky smoke signals. In the higher game levels, green cacti, shaped like the number 4, are placed randomly in the foreground and must be avoided to reach the maiden. According to the game box cover, the Native American woman herself is tied to a tall, straight cactus, but graphic limitations put her game character in front of the cactus, hands behind her. If Custer reaches the woman, he immediately lifts her up, puts her legs straight up against his hip, and begins having sex. The animation jumps between two jerky frames, Float Sam and Jet Sam. His hands are on her protruding nipples, not supporting her behind, the balance of her weight on his long penis. The Custer's Revenge instruction manual was broken down into sections like foreplay, the object of the game, gameplay, and afterplay, a message from the company. Another section, scoring, says what to do when you get the maiden. Quote, when Custer successfully reaches the maiden, repeatedly depress the fire button. Do not hold it down. You will receive 1 point for each time you score. Suppress it over and over again as rapidly as you can. Watch how the maiden smiles and kicks up her heels, and Custer flips his lid. As Custer scores, a fanfare of charge is played. You do not have to wait for the tune to finish to score again. Just keep pressing the button over and over again. Mystique announced Custer's Revenge in October 1982, setting up a preview for retailers and the press the same week in Manhattan. 250 protesters picketed in front of the New York Hilton. The game features an enactment of a white male, General Custer, ravishing an Indian woman who is tied to a post. Women Against Pornography member Kristen Riley complained to the press. Her colleagues carried signs that said, "Custer Revenge says rape is fun," and "Stop making fun out of women's pain." Once there was a lot of furor over the game, the company denied that it was rape. They claimed that it was mutually consulting visual images, which is really asinine, unquote. By the end of the week, Atari sued Mystique and American Multiple Industries for distributing sex scene material on its 2600 system. Atari, like the general public, is outraged by this conduct, and we are taking the initiative by filing the suit. Michael Moon, president of Atari's Consumer Electronics Division, told the Associated Press. Atari's official comment was, quote, "does not condone or approve the use of its home video game technology, which was designed for wholesome family entertainment," unquote. Based on the Activision court case, third-party companies didn't have to get Atari's consent approval, only give a royalty on each game sold. Atari had no real power. American Multiple Industries sued Suffolk County, New York, for $11 million for trying to prohibit the game from being sold. The county said the ban was legitimate since it believed Custer's Revenge was a danger to the health and safety of Suffolk County residents. In Canada, custom authorities approved Custer's Revenge for importation after its October release, but within weeks, 20 groups protested. By December 1st, Canadian Customs reversed the decision. As veteran video game journalist Arnie Katz recalls in the book The Ultimate History of Video Games, "I remember talking to a representative of Women Against Pornography and telling her that, in my opinion, the best way to keep the game from selling was to ignore it. These were games that most people wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. They trained all their energy on Custer's Revenge, and they succeeded in helping it sell twice as many copies as the other adult games. It sold 80,000 copies at $50 a pop." Mystique released 2 follow-up games, Bachelor Party and BM and Eat 'em. Bachelor Party is a clone of Atari's Breakout. In Breakout, you use a bat to hit a ball against colored bricks, sort of a one-player version of Pong. In Bachelor Party, the bricks are women built like Amazons, and the ball resembles a well-endowed midget. Beat 'em and Eat 'em is a variation of Activision's Kaboom. And in Activision's title, you catch dropping bombs before they reach the bottom of the screen. In Mystique's game, you control a busty nude blonde with her mouth wide open to the sky. A man with his penis longer than his torso drops his love down for the woman to catch. The game box, which features a cartoon of a woman licking ice cream, reads, quote, "You are a local leading lady, and all the uptown boys are standing in line for a date. But a savvy soda slinger just around the corner is more down your alley. You just can't seem to get enough of his famous fountain treats," unquote. These games would also sell for $49.95, about $20 higher than the average 2600 game. Alan Roberts, another transplant from the porn industry, started the company Universal Game X after directing the hit Young Lady Chatterley. The first game, 1983's X-Man, was a Pac-Man-inspired title with random mazes. A small pale guy with a penis the size of his legs, X-Man runs toward the door at the center of the screen while avoiding scissors, teeth, and crabs, the Freudian parallel to castration, oral sex, and venereal diseases. The game changes once you make it to the door. 2 huge black characters appear, X-Man standing in the buff, and a blonde with purple skin bent over in front of him. X-Man's long penis is in the purple woman's behind. Now you must get the right rhythm, moving the joystick left to right to make the woman come. It would be the first time in console game history the goal was to pleasure the woman. Her nipples enlarge based on your performance. A whirly, flute-like sound effect repeats faster as she gets closer to coming. When the round ends, points are tallied based on the number of orgasms achieved. Quote, "The response from players has been enthusiastic, women and men alike. We were anticipating terrific business, but it has been hindered by a result of the Mystique line and the bad press that came from it, Roberts said in a magazine interview at the time. Certain stores think that because Custer was a bad game, all adult games are bad games. That's not true at all. X-Man flopped, sinking Universal GameX shortly after its release. As the Custer's Revenge controversy died down, Mystique also experienced a drop in sales. Custer's Revenge was the only title not based on another popular game, and sales of Bachelor Party and Beat 'em and Eat 'em were relatively poor. Caballero Control Corporation closed Mystique. Alan Roberts went back to directing movies, directing Young Lady Chatterley 2 and The Happy Hooker Goes to Hollywood. The rights to Custer's Revenge and other Mystique games were sold to GameSource, a California-based company. Under the moniker Playground, GameSource re-released Custer's Revenge, Beat 'em and Eat 'em, and Bachelor Party with two key differences. PlayAround created what is called the, quote, double ender, a 2-in-1 cartridge that sounded like it was a two-headed dildo. PlayAround's long cartridges allowed players to buy two of its games for one low price, a marketing ploy imitated by other companies. PlayAround also featured female versions of the Mystique games, the first time that sexual games were made for women. Bachelor Party became Bachelorette Party. Beat 'em and Eat 'em became Philly Flasher, replacing cum shots with breast milk, and Custer's Revenge was renamed Westward Ho. PlayAround simply modified the titles and switched the main characters from male to female. New games were the medieval romp Lady in the Waiting / Night on the Town, the maze title Gigolo / Cat House Blues, and the flying game Jungle Fever / Burning Desire. The latter was another game about interracial sex. Similar to Mystique, all of PlayAround's new games were clones of its competitors' titles. Demand for PlayAround's games weren't enough to encourage stores to carry its products, so gamers who actually wanted Philly Flasher could rarely find it in the stores. PlayAround closed shop as quickly as it opened. Toy store shelves sagged under the weight of the hundreds of Atari 2600 games being released every year. Atari's open market system offered no checks and balances. The Kool-Aid Man had a game, as did the movie Porky's. Atari itself shipped an estimated 4 million copies of Pac-Man, even though there were only 10 million Atari 2600 owners. Milton Bradley, Quaker Oats, and countless other companies jumped into the industry, often with their own systems, dividing the flagging video game market even further. Overstocked and underselling, Toys R Us and other retailers began having bargain bins filled with $5 titles that were $29.95 a week before. Those that invested the most in the video game business ended 1983 in debt. Coleco posted record losses for its 50-year history. Atari lost $583 million in 1 year. As the year closed, Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin, two feminist theorists against pornography, organized a Minneapolis City Council meeting called the, quote, public hearings on ordinance to add pornography as discrimination against women. It consisted of testimony from women who felt their lives were destroyed by pornography. One participant, a woman who went by Miss U for anonymity purposes, discussed her sexual assault. She says, I was attacked by two white men. From the beginning, they let me know they hated my people, even though it was obvious from their remarks that they knew very little about us. It let me know that the rape of a squaw by white men was practically honored by white society. In fact, it has been made into a video game called Custer's Revenge, and that's what they screamed in my face as they threw me to the ground. They said, this is more fun than Custer's Revenge. They held me down as one was running the tip of the knife across my face and throat. He said, do you want to play Custer's Revenge? It's great. You lose, but you don't care, do you? You like a little pain, don't you, squaw? They both laughed, and he said, there was a lot of talk in Custer's Revenge. You should be grateful, squaw, that all American boys like us want you. Maybe we'll tie you to a tree and start a fire around you. Unquote. Defending Custer's Revenge the year before, American Multiple Industries President Stuart Keston explained why AMI and Mystique made the game. He said, we just couldn't see adults playing with spaceships anymore. Unquote.